walk a lonely road, the only one that I have ever known. Don't know where it goes, but it's home to me and I walk alone.
Wednesday night edition of Sports Talk Media Network. Chris Bergen with you here tonight from Stardust. Meantime, Matt Smith over in Georgetown and Josh Cohen ready to line you up back home in Columbia. 888-898-2525. We'll have room for your phone calls coming up in a little while. We'll get back into the Clemson discussion, plus some other major news notes that we want to hit on today. But in the meantime, of course, coming up next week, the final major of the golf season will take place overseas with the British Open, and kind enough to join us with a sneak preview of the British Open, but more so the announcement earlier this week that the United States has named its Ryder Cup captain for next year, and it's Keegan Bradley, somewhat of a surprise, as we welcome in our golf insider from Golf Today, MJ Ward, joins us tonight here on Sports Talk. MJ, how are you on this hot Wednesday night?
Well, it's good to be with you guys, and there's never a dull moment in the golf lane as we reach the pinnacle of it with next week's Open Championship. But certainly the Ryder Cup announcement was really a surprise as well.
Well, I'm glad you thought so, because I fully anticipated it would be one of two people, and Keegan Bradley was not one of them. I thought maybe Phil Mickelson would get a chance. Certainly Tiger Woods would be in consideration. You said it was a surprise. Why was it a surprise to you that Keegan Bradley was named the captain?
Well, I mean, if you go back to pre-pandemic and pre-live, I think it was probably almost an absolute given that the 25 Ryder Cup at Bethpage would have had Phil Mickelson as captain. And I think it would be fair to say that the Mickelson-Woods situation would have resulted in them having be captains for one home match and one away match. And when Live happened, Phil took himself completely out. That ship has sailed. There's no return for Phil. I just don't see ever being a captain. He literally burned his bridges. With Tiger, it's hard to say, because his record, what he's done in golf. Obviously, he won the first publicly played U.S. Open at Bethpage in 2002. Essentially, the PGA of America, they were going after him, like a guy is going after a gal for a prom night. I mean, they were determined to see if they could get him, and they were going to push it as far and as long as they could. And then it just became, an impossibility, because there are time complications if you drag this out much further. So, I didn't see Keegan Bradley. I thought Stuart Sink possibly had a chance to be picked because he was a vice captain, and they had gone that route previously. I didn't see people like Steve Stricker or Davis Love or Fred Couples, because, basically you're just rewinding the clock to an era that has now really passed on, or Jim Furyk even. So, but picking Bradley, yeah, that's a reach for a lot of different reasons.
Well, before we get further into Keegan Bradley, Tiger Woods, obviously a major name and cast a shadow over the last 2 decades in golf. Why do you think it didn't work out? It sounds like ultimately Tiger Woods said no. Why would Tiger Woods say no to an honor like this?
Well, I mean, you have to go by let me put it this way. There's probably the real reason, and then there's the stated reason. In his statement that he gave, and it was read at the press event yesterday in Manhattan, it really came down to his time availability and what he feels he can give in terms of his time. He's on the advisory board for the tour. He's obviously taken an active role in what the ongoing discussions are with Liv, and then more importantly, how the PGA Tour will be structured going forward between the guys who are at the elite level and then the average players, or I should say average players. I mean, there's highly skilled players, but the bulk of the rest of the field. So I think it was a question of the time. There's no way to know how Tiger could have fit this in or not fit it in, because, his name still carries obviously a tremendous amount of weight. Clearly the PGA of America was going to wait it out and take as long as necessary to see what they could do to get him to commit to it. But it's interesting that when he fell out of the mix, they had to come up with something really quick. And the way it was explained at the press conference, and I think it makes all the sense logically. But I think the question comes down to is, does Keegan Bradley have the goods to deliver as a captain? And there's no way to know the answer to that until the matches are being concluded. I can give you examples of people. I mean, frankly, Paul McGinley being picked years back, not too many years ago, about 10 years ago, at 2014, I believe, at Glen Eagles. I mean, to be captain, Paul McGinley's record compared to the All-Stars that the Europeans had previously as their captains, whether it be Sevi Ballesteros or Bernhard Longer or Ian Woosnam, he was not really a high player in the pantheon of wins and losses. Keegan Bradley has a better record than Paul McGinley, but at the same time, Keegan Bradley as a marquee, no, it's not going to be anything close to Tiger Woods or even if Phil Mickelson if he was still eligible. So it'll be interesting to see how Keegan Bradley works his way through this minefield and being a captain. Because I will tell you this, his legacy will be marked based on what happens with this Ryder Cup. I mean, unless he wins other golf tournaments in his career, possibly that could happen. He's still active as a player. But his legacy is going to be really pinned down to how this turns out at Bethpage in about 14 months.
Our golf insider from Golf Today, MJ Ward, joining us here tonight on Sports Talk and looking back on the selection, somewhat curious selection of Keegan Bradley as United States Ryder Cup champion. And one thing he's going to have to change is momentum, right, MJ, because the Europeans have won 5 of the last 7, 8 of the last 11 against the Americans. How much impact, though, can a captain have? Or is it finally just going to boil down to like every other sport? If the players don't play well, regardless who's coaching them, they're not going to win.
Well, that's very true. Everything you just said is absolutely true. I mean, the captain doesn't hit a shot. It's the players who play. But I think you have to get players prepared. What we found now in the Ryder Cup now over the last 4 or 5 matches now, the home team has had a tremendous advantage, and the differentiation between the teams, the point spreads over the last 4 or 5 matches, we haven't had any real close ones in quite some time. And the home team situation is unique. I will tell you, I've played Bethpage all my life. I'm very familiar with the facility. I will tell you that the Europeans, they better bring their earmuffs with them when they get there, because they will never hear a crowd like what they're going to face. My only concern is that the security measures need to be really tightened up because of what happened at the Travelers event a few weeks ago. You can't have situations like that happen. I'm sure they're very aware of this, and I'm sure they're going to make sure that the precautions are taken. But in terms of getting players ready, I just think that Keegan, I think what a captain has to do basically is kind of work through the personalities of the players that you have and then get as much feedback from them as possible so that they're in as much comfort zone as one can possibly be. You have to keep this in mind with a Ryder Cup. I mean, it'll be played in late September of next year. So there will be a space of time between when the Tour Championship finishes up on Labor Day and then when the Ryder Cup is being played. So there's a lot of different variations here about what players should be picked. It'll be interesting to see what Keegan Bradley does on his captain's picks. I mean, the 6 players that go in automatically, he has no role to play with that, besides obviously knowing who they are. But the 6 captain's picks and who he picks as his vice captains, that's all going to set the terms of the atmosphere. But make no mistake about it. I mean, the Europeans, to play them, even on home soil, is going to take an effort to win, because we are now past the Tiger Woods, Phil Mickelson, Jim Furyk. That whole show has now come to an end, and now we're into this next wave. So I would not be surprised if Keegan goes with some of the younger players that you're seeing emerge. I mean, clearly there's, some of the heavyweights like, for example, Scotty Scheffler and Colin Morikawa. I mean, you have them, at the top. It'll be interesting to see what he does with live players. I mean, I know Keegan at the press conference yesterday, he mentioned that I'm going to take the best players, is what he said. So a guy like Bryson DeChambeau, Brooks Koepka, who knows if Dustin Johnson is back in form. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. The captain's real function is making sure that all of the distractions and all of the, what I call the byplay stuff that goes on, is taken care of, and make sure that the players are ready to play. At that point, that's all you can do, and then it's up to the players to play.
You mentioned how noisy it will be at Bethpage next year for the Ryder Cup. It almost reminiscent of the War by the Shore, Kiowa. That's when I first really started digging into and enjoying the Ryder Cup so many years ago. The United States fans were just off the charts down at Kiowa Island. Do you think it will be sort of that home course environment? Is it going to get that rowdy in your mind?
Well, I tell you, when you combine alcohol and when you combine the the absolute fan craze that goes on, this will be my 12th Ryder Cup that I'm going to be attending. I've seen the matches both on this side of the pond and on the other side. There have been some really nasty words said by fans to players during the course of matches, and they really need to keep an eye. As someone who lives in the New York metropolitan area, I would not want to see Bethpage get a black eye because of a situation that could happen at the matches. I mean, it should be competitive, and it should be where fans can get into it. But there is a fine line between getting into a match and then trying to exert an influence where you're seeking to embarrass somebody or seeking to create a scene so that the flow of the matches are interrupted. I would hope and I would think that the PGA of America and New York State, this is a state park, Bethpage, that they will have the full complement of security, and they will take a zero tolerance to anybody who attempts to do anything that could take away from the flow of the matches. That would be my hope. But as we saw at the Travelers, as we've seen in other situations, when you have that many people and you have alcohol, you have the possibility for people doing and saying things that are clearly out of bounds. But I fully anticipate that they would be on top of this, knowing full well what the circumstances are of having the event, at Bethpage and on Long Island.
All right, MJ, we'll certainly try and catch back up with you next week to look at it further, but let's at least get a sneak peek as to next weekend, the final major of the year in the golf calendar with the British Open coming up. And Rory McIlroy said today at the press conference for this weekend's Scottish Open that he has put his disastrous finish at the U.S. Open behind him. First off, do you buy that? And if that's indeed the case, is he the favorite next weekend in your mind?
Well, I'll just repeat what Bill Parcells used to say as a football paraphrase. You are what your record says you are. So until we see a score, until we see something, I mean, Rory McIlroy is fully capable of winning the Scottish Open. I mean, make no mistake about it. He did that when he threw away the Masters in 2011. He set U.S. Open records with the next major when the U.S. Open came up in June at Congressional in 2011. He is fully capable of turning the script around. But the bottom line to this is, until he gets that monkey off his back with a major win, this is still going to be the storyline for a guy like him. And, there's other players that are fully capable, of winning, at Troon. So we'll see what happens at Renaissance this week when they play the Scottish Open. But I think it'll be interesting to see the flow and how McIlroy gets back into the competitive scene. He's fully capable of doing some really interesting things. And, clearly my hope is that he's in form so that we can see him play and hopefully play at his best what happens next week.
How difficult a golf course is Royal Troon compared to the other golf courses on that British Open rotation?
Well, Troon is basically a golf course that goes out in a series of holes in a straight line for the most part, and then it makes a U-turn. The first 6-7 holes, you really need to get the score going early. One of the famous holes in the world that people will see next week is the Postage Stamp. It's a par 3, plays about 130 yards. The green is about the size of someone's closet, and you better make sure you hit that green. And when you have wind conditions blowing, it'll make a premium on people who can control the flight of their golf ball. When you make the turn and you return, the prevailing wind is usually what you're facing for the balance of the round coming in. The last time the Open was there, it was a tremendous slugfest between Henrik Stenson and Phil Mickelson as they battled it out with each other, and eventually Henrik was the champion. So it'll be interesting to see. But the thing about Troon is, like any Open Championship course, the weather and the wind pattern, they dictate everything. But for Troon itself, you need to get out of the box early to score, because making birdies and trying to play catch-up late in the day is going to be a lot tougher to do. But with these guys and the way they're playing, I would not. I fully expect them to be under par. Clearly, a guy like McIlroy, the names that we've seen before, the Schefflers of this world, Bryson DeChambeau's been playing great. I fully expect that the cream of the crop from this year is going to do it one more time, and we'll be interested to see when they shuffle the cards which one has the final winner and is called the champion golfer of the year.
His opinion column at Golf Today is, can Clark Kent become Superman? At Beth Page, chatting about Keegan Bradley being named the United States Ryder Cup captain for next year. MJ Ward joins us here this evening. MJ, always fun catching up with you and tapping into that wealth of golf knowledge. Enjoy the weekend, and hopefully we'll be able to track you down next week and get a better preview of the British Open.
Guys, it's always a pleasure, and like I said, the Open is the final major this year, and for golf fans, it'll be something to see next week at Troon. You guys have a good time. We'll talk to you from Scotland next week.
Excellent. Looking forward to that. We'll just have to figure out a way to make sure that we can keep MJ awake, guys. He'll be 5-6 hours in front of us. Remember last year, I think it was midnight, 12:30, that he had to call in, and we had a hard time tracking him down sometimes because he was, asleep. So hopefully that won't be the case this coming year, but always good to have MJ Ward on the program. It's amazing to me, Smitty. You listen to him run through all the stuff that we chat with him about when we have him on the program. All of that is just knowledge locked up in his brain and no notes. And it's remarkable that what he can recall in terms of his golf knowledge. He's as good a golf reporter as I know.
From afar, not being a golf expert, obviously, I think, how important would the captain of the Ryder Cup team be? Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, the players have to play. But it sounds to me, and I'm going to put words in MJ Ward's mouth, but you need the respect. Yeah. The respect factor, because he said Keegan Bradley doesn't have the resume that most captains have. And you could tell MJ Ward was wincing a bit as he said that, Phil Mickelson talked himself out of it by getting over there with Liv, and Tiger Woods just, he thought that was going to be a better fit. So I find that very interesting. I don't think it has much to do with the strategy, it seems, as much as bringing those guys together and being somebody that everyone can look up to and rally behind. It's so fascinating about team golf is probably, we have so much experience with other team sports, mm-hmm. but team golf is probably just completely different than any other team sport that we experience. It's not like a basketball locker room. It's not going to be, because these guys compete individually all against each other all the time. And I mean all the time. From the time they're 12 years old, usually they know each other's names and see each other on scoreboards at junior tournaments and then up through the ranks. So to put these guys together and to pull it all together, you need a captain that commands respect. So now, if you're pulling for the United States, as I am, you hope Keegan Bradley is the man to do it.